Most people who say they do not have time to start a podcast do not actually have a time problem. They have chosen a podcast format that requires too much time. You do not have to record every week, research for hours, edit your own episodes, write show notes, create clips, and post everything yourself. That is not podcasting. That's trying to become an entire production company. People do it, but you don't have to do it. In today's video, I'm going to explain how busy expats can create a podcast without adding more work to their schedule. One of the statements I hear often, when I talk to experts, coaches, founders, is I want to start a podcast, but I cannot start a podcast because I am too busy. I am too busy. And these are people who they find time to guest on other people's podcasts. But because what they know of podcasting, people who were running everything, doing all that by themselves. And so they think of podcasting, they're like, oh, I don't have that time. I shouldn't even bother doing it. Okay. So they think of recording every week. They think of spending hours researching. They think of editing everything themselves, creating the graphics, clips, and descriptions. They think of posting on every platform, constantly searching for topics. That's what's in their head. And I understand because most of the versions of podcasts they see out there, it's podcasts of people who do those things. So they're not entirely wrong, but that's not true. It's not completely true. There are multiple versions of these things. It's like if I told you that I'm wearing this, I don't know what to call this, but this is a sweater. I don't know. So it's black. Okay. And if all you see this kind of clothes, it was black. And you're like, oh, I want to get one of these, but I don't like black colors. And I'm like, but then there are other colors. But all you've seen the designs is just in black, and you don't know it has not crossed your mind that there are other designs in different colors. Okay, so that's how it is with podcasting. All they've seen are people who they're running the podcast, doing everything themselves, and so when they think of starting a podcast, that's the picture that comes to mind. Okay, so one thing I want you to put in mind is that you're not too busy to have a podcast. You are too busy to operate a badly designed podcast. So I want you to listen to that again. You're not too busy to have a podcast. You're too busy to operate a badly designed podcast. Okay? So what I'm going to introduce to you is the MVP, the minimum viable podcast. So what's a minimum viable podcast? A minimum viable podcast has one clear audience. It's very clear. Who's this podcast for? It's not, it's for business owners. No. It's clear. Who is this podcast for? Oh, it's for women in their 50s who are trying to start and run a business. It's very clear. One clear audience. And then it has one clear transformation. What are you trying to do? And this is particularly important for every podcast has a purpose. And the fact that you do not know the purpose of the podcast does not mean that the podcast does not have a purpose. There's a reason why people come to the podcast. And I'm talking to founders, experts, coaches. There is the results you provide, and that's the clear transformation. When people listen to your podcast for 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, what would change in their life because they started listening to your podcast and doing what your podcast talks about? That's the clear transformation. Okay, we don't want people to just listen to your podcast and after 6 months, nothing changes. So which means that if they did not listen to your podcast, they won't lose anything because they didn't listen to your podcast. So that doesn't work either. So one clear audience, one clear transformation. Okay. The other thing we want is one repeatable episode format. Now, this one is very important because when you have a repeatable episode format, you're not waking up asking yourself, so what should we make an episode about? It's clear. It's like your favorite series movie. Every episode. Okay, an example of a movie I could think of. I'm trying to think of a series movie, but most series movie it's same format. This happens, and then usually for the crime series, there's a criminal, and then they're trying to find a criminal, and then they try to chase the criminal, and then they encounter a problem, and then eventually they catch the criminal. Now the criminal commits, it's different for each episode, but it's a format. You know what to expect, and then it's easy for them to just write and plug and play and do so many episodes of that format. So when I talk about episode format, that's what I'm referring to. Okay, that's what I'm referring to. And the other thing is, with episode format, you also look at, okay, how long is this episode? Is it 1 hour, 2 hours? That's what most people think of. Like, oh, my episode has to be 1 hour, 2 hours. No. Your episode can be 10 to 15 minutes long. It could be 20 minutes. It could be 30 minutes. It doesn't have to be an hour. Okay. The question is, how long do I need to take one idea and go from start to finish, like to address this specific problem and provide a solution? How long do I need? And usually 10 to 30 minutes is enough. 10 minutes is enough to touch on an idea. And then within 15 to 30 minutes is enough. And that also works well for most listeners, because many people are listening to your podcast while they're walking in something. And so it's not like they're sitting down and doing 1 hour, 2 hours. With the popular podcasts out there, they're about an hour, about 2 hours. And you see that and you're like, oh, I should do that. Okay. The other thing you want to look at is, and then you could also look at, there are things like guests, there's a solo episodes, and many of those things. Okay. The next thing you want to look at is, because you've designed the episode format, it helps you for the next part. Because when you have the episode format, let's say, now, I'm not saying this is what you have to do, but depending on the kind of show and the kind of topic you do, let's say each of your episodes is about 15 minutes long, okay? So what that means is that with 15 minutes long, it means that because you have an episode format, you can sit down and in the next 90 minutes, record 4 episodes, okay? And then, of course, there's one central call to action. So basically what's happening is that every time you have to decide, it's wasted time. So as much as possible, if you can reduce the time you need to spend deciding. For example, the call to action. If you know that you want to send people to a newsletter or to buy a book or to visit or join a webinar, if that's the call to action, that should be pre-recorded. And so what will happen is you just need to focus on the episode. And then the intro, it's kind of like the episode in your favorite movie. They have their intro, they have their outro, and then there's the episode in the middle. So you don't want to start thinking of would the intro be, or what would the outro be. And so you want to also have a production process that's handled by a team. You want to get someone to edit the scheduling and the publishing of the episodes, so you don't have to spend time doing that, because that's just time that you would use to focus on your business. And this is something that it's not only you that can do it. Recording an episode and telling your story, that's something that you can do. That's only you can do. But this is an episode. Scheduling's on the podcast platform. Anyone can do that as long as they have the skills. And of course, that's what we do with for our clients. We help them, once they record, we help them edit and schedule the episodes. Okay, so a possible format, just to run down, will be 20 minutes solo teaching episodes. And this is very important because, and I want to touch on it again, is because most of the episodes you've seen, they are guest interviews. And so when you want to do a podcast, you're thinking, do I have to do a guest interview? No. You can do solo episodes where you're answering questions that you've been getting from clients, and you get a lot of these questions over and over again. So you could pick up a question. Let's say a client is asking, how do I, the very specific questions the clients ask. And if you don't have, as an expert, as a founder, as a business owner, you get these questions day in, day out. Okay, so you can address that. But if you don't get questions like that, what you could do is you could find a popular video and on that topic and look at the comments and pick a couple of questions from actual humans and then respond to that as your content. Okay, so that's one. So now you see, now in a month you spend about 1 to 2 hours recording podcast content to go out for 4 weeks, which is a month of content. And so what happens is that podcast eventually turns into one full podcast episode, which goes out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. It also turns into one YouTube video, so it's also on YouTube. It's packaged, and then that is also repurposed. So this is what we do for our clients: is we also repurpose that into clips, so 3 to 5 short clips, and that goes out to YouTube, TikTok, all those reels and shorts platforms, and that also becomes a newsletter. Okay, so you've poured out your thoughts, that also becomes a newsletter and is sent out to the email list. And that would also turn into several LinkedIn posts. And also that would turn into quotes and graphics. And these are materials you can also use for sales conversations, because the questions you're asking are actual questions people are asking, and so you can send these episodes to potential leads before they even hop on the sales call for them to listen or tune in. So you see that this is an ecosystem, and so because you're showing up and recording a podcast episodes that take you about 2 to 3 hours in a month, you can afford to have content going out on all your platforms without having to say, okay, how do I create content? What do I talk about? What do I share? What do I do? What do I do this? Right? And all that is taken care of, and you just show up and answer questions and tell amazing stories. Okay, so what do I recommend? A couple of things I recommend. Okay, so I've given the framework, I've explained and broken down the process. What do I recommend? Very simple. So it's a simple monthly model. You keep a running list of questions your clients ask. Okay, you keep a running list of questions your client ask. You it doesn't have to use what you use as notes. Use the app you use for keeping notes. Okay, so you want to use something that already works for you. I could tell you use Notion because that's what I use, or you could use a notes app, a regular traditional notebook if that's what you use. And every time someone asks you a question, you write it down. It depends on the format of your show, but every time someone asks you a question, you write it down. Every time you see, because you're having sales conversations, you're talking to clients, whether they buy or do not buy, and you're hearing the what do you call it now? What's stopping them, the obstacles, the objections. Yeah, that's the word, the objection. You're hearing it. And is it hearing it? You can hear the objections. They tell you, I'm supposed to get this program, but it's not going to work for me because of this. These are questions people ask. Very specific questions from actual humans. So the sales calls, if you're recording that, you can go and write that, and you would tell your sales team to write those questions, and then you address it, and then you talk about this as an episode. You go into it and address it. Okay, and then when you record all four episodes in one sitting, you send it to the production team, or if you'd love to work with us, you can become our client, and we just take it and we edit it, we chop it and repurpose it into different pieces of content, and it goes out to your podcast platforms, your YouTube channel, and your other social media platforms. And so you're present, you're creating content to get clients, to establish your authority in the space, without having to become a content creator or an influencer. Yeah. And so what you just need to do will be to focus on the questions and answering the questions. And because this is what you do day to day, you don't have to go out of your way to say, okay, I'm going to create content. No, it's more like, oh, this person asked me this question. Let me just record something to answer that question. Okay. And one of the things you would have noticed is I've shared the framework, and with outsourcing production, you get a structure, you get a team to help you work on the episodes without having to spend your precious time, which you would have been using on other tasks on the business, on that. Okay, so on the final note, before deciding that you do not have time for a podcast, redesign the podcast. And Podnovation, which is our brand, helps experts launch and operate podcasts without spending their week figuring out editing, logic, publishing, and production. You can start with our podcast discovery call in the link in the description, to see how we can help you bring that podcast to life. We already have a podcast that's draining your time and energy. See how we can design it such that you have a podcast and the podcast doesn't have you. I'll see you in the next episode.